Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drum McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at thechangeleader.com. And now, here's your host, Drum McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Dr. Sam Horn is the Masters University's 9th president and its 2nd president of its seminary. Sam's background is rooted in Christian-based higher education, and prior to Masters, he served at Northland International University, Central Baptist Theological Seminary, and Bob Jones University in multiple roles. Sam has a passion for enrollment, and he led Bob Jones's growth over the last decade. Although Sam was slated to begin in early May of this year, he came on board in March to help shepherd Masters through the COVID crisis. With COVID in full swing, the first 100 days of a presidency has changed. It used to be 6 months to listen before making changes, but now the first 100 days is now hitting the ground running just to survive. And Sam joined us to speak to these points. Sam, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Drum. What a blessing and a privilege to be here with you today.
Well, it's great to see you again. I think we were talking before we started. Last time we really saw each other face to face was before this whole COVID mess started back in February.
It was a lifetime ago, almost. I remember being in the room that I'm in doing this broadcast with you, and the board extending to me a unanimous call to accept the presidency of the Masters University and Seminary. And I remember standing there thinking, boy, this is going to change the trajectory of my life. And of course, I accepted that, having no idea what was going to happen in the next 7 months. But that's the last time I saw you. We were both in this room together.
Exactly. And, there has been a lot of water that's gone under the bridge. I was talking with my wife this morning saying, it seems like we've been doing this COVID thing for 3 or 4 years. It's not 7 months.
I was going to say, it feels like a lifetime. I mean, I was telling somebody on my cabinet, I feel like if I were in dog years, these would be 7 years. Each month is a year. I've lived like 7 years here. But, it's been an interesting and frankly, for me, an exhilarating time. I mean, I have actually, I don't think anybody enjoys COVID and the pressures, but it has been an energizing time for our institution and for me.
Well, it's like we were talking before, you can't let a good crisis go to waste. And knowing your personality, you're not the kind of person who's going to let moss grow under their feet. You're going to move forward, and this has given you the impetus to do exactly what's needed to make necessary changes.
Well, and I have a great team. I think any new leader coming in has to rest on the team that's there. And this is a great team. There was a phenomenal team. The former president here did a good job establishing a team and laying out a base. And so I got to come in and work with that team and build that team and establish a renewed vision and unity with that team. But apart from that team, I would have been dead in the water. So I owe a great deal to the team that I get to serve.
Yeah, that team that you've got there, I have never met a stronger millennial team than what you've got.
They're great. They're just, and they're exhilarating to work with. They're visionary, but they're also great executors. And that's the thing I think that I've appreciated most about this team is they actually are good at executing a vision that's been laid out and a strategy that's been decided on. So I think that's been part of how we've weathered COVID from our standpoint, because we're in the hot zone. A lot of universities and colleges are around the country, and they're facing we're all facing COVID, but everybody's got a slightly different set of circumstances. Some are more restrictive than others. Well, I don't think you get more restrictive than LA County. It's one of the if not the hot spots. And of course, in our state, our restrictions are extremely pervasive and invasive. And so for most colleges in California, especially the ones that are in LA County, it has been extraordinarily difficult. Most universities are suffering, and not just a little bit. The economic hit that has come because of COVID to them has been crippling. And the lack of guidance and the lack of timeliness. And I'm not wanting to reflect poorly on our elected officials, but frankly, the lack of timeliness and the lack of guidance throughout the summer was probably one of the most difficult and unprofessional things that I think most of our institutions have faced. And we're all scrambling because of it.
Yeah. And so that summertime took you into those first 100 days, which is the subject of our podcast. I'd love to continue to talk about what we've been talking about, but in deference to your fellow presidents, there are going to be a lot of changes that come about as a result of COVID. There are people who are already retiring. I know at least a handful of presidents who have said, I'm staying on for another year because I want to see my institution get through this. As a way of talking about this, the first 100 days, the first 6 months, we've always heard that it's important for presidents to come in and start to listen, to find out, to learn their team, to not make a lot of changes. I always thought that was a reality, but COVID's blown that up completely.
Correct. I've been in higher ed for most of my adult career, 30 plus years. And there's a little saying that I love that stuck with me throughout my time. I heard this early on in my career, and it's really driven a lot of my thinking. And that is that culture eats strategy for breakfast every time. Culture eats strategy for breakfast every time. And until you know the culture of a place, all of your strategy is going to be hindered. And so I think you're right when you say the first 90 to 100 days are super important as a new leader, where you're coming in and you're establishing a leadership style, who you are as a person. People inside the institution have never worked for you before. They don't know who you are as a person. They don't know sort of your values. In a ministry or in an institution or in a business, whoever's leading has to lead through a values proposition. And until people know those values and can actually trust that those values are more than just words, it's really hard for your strategies to be implemented. And additionally, until you know the culture, you don't really know effectively what strategies to implement. You may have sort of a high level overarching set of strategies, but trying to get those in place. So I think I would have agreed with and intended fully to practice the idea that the first 100 days, I'm just an observer. I'm speaking into things. I'm asking a lot of questions. I am spending time with key stakeholders. And I accepted the presidency in early February with the agreement that I would not officially take office till June 1st. And that period of time was intended intentionally to give me time and the institution time to get to know each other. I was going to spend a couple of weeks, a month out here and just sit in meetings and have lunch with people and just get to know people and sort of ease into the role. And then obviously June 1st through the next 90 days would have been a slow onboarding, which would have made sense given the trauma and some of the things our institution had been through prior to COVID. So that was the plan. And then COVID hit. And I remember talking to the chairman of our board and realizing that the plan was going to have to be aborted. We were having to make decisions quickly that were going to have long-term impact for years to come on the institution I was going to lead. And the board felt that I needed to be at the head of that decision-making process. So on March 15th, less than a month after accepting the presidency, I became the full president. I actually stepped into the role, and it has been pedal to the metal ever since. And it has not been only because of desire. I mean, it has been by necessity that has happened. And just the things that COVID accelerated, or the pressures that came because of COVID. And then on top of that, the things that the institution itself was facing that could not be kicked down the road without some potential long-term damage being done to the institution. it all sort of put that first 100 days waiting period aside, and we had to come in together and go at it hard. I think one of the things that helped was COVID. Everybody understood that. Everybody on the team understood, look, this is not how any of us anticipated it would work, but we all see that it has to work this way. This isn't the new president coming in and just charging in like a bull in a china shop. This is board driven. This is COVID driven. This is for the crisis of the moment. And we're going to have to lead and start this presidency in a different way than any of us anticipated. And everybody bought into that.
And it's good. You're absolutely right. The culture is so critical to know, but you also have a very strong culture there at Masters that they will engage and they will do what's needed in the moment.
Correct. And that was a very big strength for us.
Yeah. As you guys did, so did many other institutions, converting all of your courses to online in the space of 2 weeks, in some cases less.
There were about 5 or 6 challenges that we faced immediately that were, I want to say, life-threatening or institutional threatening challenges to the institution. And we had to decide how we were going to handle those challenges. And so coming then to the values of the institution and saying I remember the first cabinet meeting I had, I said, before we talk about any of the decisions we have to make today, what are the values that are going to guide our decision making? And for us, as a Christian liberal arts university, there were 3. And those were do justly, we have to do the right thing. Love mercy, we have to do the right thing in the right way. And walk humbly. We have to walk in respect of and respect to our fellow laborers, our students, our faculty, our board, our authorities. We have to walk in the right spirit. We have to do business in the right way. So I just said to everybody, as we make decisions, I want to make sure that everybody gets to speak into the decision, that we have all the facts, and that we consider all the alternatives. But at the end of the day, these are the 3 things that we have to go back to. We got to do the right thing. We have to do it in the right way with regard for our students and our faculty and our constituents. And we have to do it humbly. We have to do it in the right spirit. So our first decision was closing our campus. That was back in March. I remember the very first decision I made as the president was to shut down our institution that is in its 93rd year of history.
And there's not too many people who could say that.
It was my first decision. We had done what a lot of colleges were doing. It was early on in the pandemic. We were starting to realize, okay, this is a little more serious than initially people were thinking. What are we going to do? We decided to extend spring break because our students were already on spring break. And then we got word that Governor Newsom was going to shut the state down and issue a stay-at-home order. None of us knew what that meant. Did that mean people were going to be bound to the college campus and they weren't going to be able to leave? Or did that mean if they were out of state, they couldn't come back? And so we made a very difficult decision. Looking back now, was the right decision. And we made it days before the stay-at-home order finally came down. And that was, we're going to shut our campus down and go fully remote and do it within 10 days. I am forever thankful to our provost. I am forever thankful to our IT director and our chief information officer and to our faculty, because they did what I didn't think this institution could do and what a lot of schools found out. They were able to pivot on a dime. So that was our first challenge. Our second challenge was what to do about room, board, and tuition. We knew the tuition piece was safe, but what about the room and board? For our small institution that was already on a very tight margin to finish the year in the black, giving back $2.5 to $3 million in room and board was a very, very big decision. And go back to our principles, we have to do the right thing. And we have to do it with the right motive. We have to do it. And so we did. We didn't qualify in the first round for the PPE monies. And we weren't sure that we were going to get a lot from the CARES money because of our accreditation status, of which you were very, very aware, and you've been a great help to us. But I'll just never forget, sitting in the room and saying, we're going to do the right thing. We're giving that money back. And if it means we end the year in the red, we end the year in the red. Well, the last day of the fiscal year, our CFO came in and said, you're not going to believe this. He gave me the balance sheet, and we finished almost $1 million to the black. And I think all of those kinds of things just really helped our students. I knew that our third big challenge was going to be enrollment. We had been in a season of pretty severe decline, and COVID accelerated that. So I think I told you before, we had a phenomenal increase. We grew by 6% across the board, and we had the highest new student numbers we've had in 10 years. These are the kinds of things that happen because that team got together. We had a accreditation review, and as you know from your time, we had a pretty serious accreditation issue that we were facing. And through your help and the work of a team that was very dedicated, we had a fabulous visit here a few weeks ago and are looking forward to the results of that visit here this fall with great anticipation. So these are the kinds of things that COVID did for us that had we just waited for the first 90 days to happen, I don't think we would have seen.
No, you never would have. And, you also made an interesting comment as we were talking leading up to the recording about taking care of the tactical things, but also not losing sight of the strategic things that need to happen. And of course, COVID has accelerated many changes that, frankly, I think are incredibly needed in higher ed, but you still got to be able to keep the lights on, keep the doors open.
I think what COVID did for me, I spent a good bit of my career has been in higher ed management at the cabinet level or vice president level. I was the executive vice president of a university before I came here. And a good bit of my time has been spent in enrollment and marketing, higher ed marketing. And I think what COVID did for me, at least, as I came into a new institution, you are starting to realize that if all you do is address the immediate challenges that COVID presented to your campus, okay, how are we going to open? What's our reopening plan? If that's all you do, you are going to miss the incredible opportunity that COVID presents, and that is to really look at your situation, your context within higher ed. So within higher ed, you're either a community college or a university. Within universities, you're either going to be more pointed to professional training or liberal arts. And most universities now are a mix of both, as you well know. And within the Christian community, within private independent universities, there's a category called Christian higher ed. So we're in this little subset of Christian higher ed liberal arts universities. And so for all of us in that subset, we've known for some time now that massive changes are coming, not just to higher ed in general, but to our own version of higher ed, to our own niche in the higher ed community. COVID accelerated that. How are we going to face the crises that are coming our way, the demographic changes that are happening, the moves that are happening and have been happening for the last 5 to 8 years and are now accelerating away from certain regions in the country that have sort of been the centers where we've gone to find students, the birth dearth that is upon us that has certainly been looming in every enrollment manager's mind, coming up in 24 and 25 and really heading even into the 30s in the next foreseeable future, the birth dearth that is coming, the financial aid crisis and scandal and just the broken model of financial aid and the fiscal model, really the lack of sustainability for higher ed in its current model. So what do you do to that? And so I think that has really been one of the more useful things that has come out of COVID, because it's forced people in my role and in C-level roles to think beyond the moment, because we aren't going back to how it was. There's no possible way back. We sat and talked as a cabinet and said, there's no way back. So COVID is over a year from now. Life is not going to go back to the way it was even a year ago for higher ed. The present way is unsupportable. It's not going to stay the way it is. There's too much that has been uncovered. There's too much angst that has been raised. There's too many factors that have all come together in the population's mind from things they've heard on CNN and on Fox News. Wherever you get your news from, it's all been affected of how the public sees higher ed. I don't think higher ed has ever faced a greater challenge than what it is currently facing in its credibility in the eyes of the public. For decades, we've lived in this wonderful place where the public has bought the idea that the path to success in life begins and requires a 4-year liberal arts education or a 4-year, some version of a 4-year college or university degree. And that's simply not the way the public is thinking anymore. And the end users of our product are not our graduates, it's the employers who hire the graduates. And the employers are all saying, you guys are broken. We're done with you guys. You don't listen to us. You're not training out products, graduates that we're actually able to use. So we're going to alternative credentialing. We're going to different ways of preparing people for the workplace. I mean, i.e. Google and what it just announced a few days ago. That's all here. We all kind of knew it was coming, maybe 4 or 5 years off. It's here. So the only way forward for higher ed is forward. And so what does that look like? Where are the blue oceans? Where are the red oceans? What are the broken strategies that need to be abandoned? What are the new ways of doing business, not just as a university, not just as higher ed, but particularly for those of us who are in smaller niche markets like Masters University and Seminary, Christian liberal arts higher ed.
It was interesting because some of these same questions came up when we were doing strategic planning with your team before we came on board. And one of the things is getting people to shift their mentality to realize institutions of higher ed are part of the talent supply chain. And instead of just educating people, they've got to educate people for what employers need and to set these people up for the start of their careers. There's a lot of changes going on, but unfortunately we're coming up to the end of our time, and I knew that was going to happen quickly. So with that, I'm kind of wondering if there are 3 takeaways that you would give to new university presidents or folks who are going to be coming on board. What would they be?
Oh, Drum, I would say I'm going to couch my answers in the context of COVID. One would be positive. In a culture of fear can really set the agenda. And somebody has got to help people rise above fear and be positive. I'm not talking about sort of this whistle in the dark, ignore the realities, sort of blind positivity, but I'm talking about really being positive. There is a way forward. We're going to find it. We're going to get there, and constantly bringing people forward in the vision. So be positive. Secondly, I would say be proactive. Get ahead of the curve. Figure out what's coming. There are 3 books that really have impacted me in this period of time. And that would be my third thing. So be positive, be proactive, but be prepared, be informed, and not just about what's going on in higher ed around you. So things like Inside Higher Ed, EAB, all of the resources, the Chronicle, we all read those things. But there are 3 books that really were helpful to me, and I'd like to mention them if it's okay.
Please.
On the podcast. One of them is a little book called Pivot, A Vision for the New University. And it's written by a group called Credo. Joanne Soliday and Mark Lombardi are the authors of this book. And this book helped me to understand business as usual could not go on in higher ed, but I didn't know what to do the pivot. How do you do a pivot? And so this was incredibly helpful. The same authors, Joanne Soliday and her team, had written an earlier book called Surviving to Thriving. And it sort of helped me understand the importance of good governance in a university. You don't really think about governance. I mean, as a president, you know about it. Unless you've been a president before, you're typically the guy working in the governance structure, but you don't really think about using governance as a tool to advance your mission. And Surviving and Thriving was a real eye-opener for me. It really helped me kind of set my thinking along the way. And so those are 2 very helpful books. And then probably the most fascinating read for me was a book by Jeffrey Solingo. And he's sort of a new voice. He's been around for some time, but he's really come of his own here in the last couple of years. But he wrote a book called There Is Life After College. And if there were one book, I would say every university president going through COVID facing tomorrow ought to read, it's his book, There Is Life After College. I'm making all of our administrators and all of our academic leadership read this book. There's other books, How College Works, etc. But Life After College was eye-opening. And it was very, very helpful to me. So those would be my 3 suggestions. Be positive, be proactive, be prepared and informed.
Oh, that's great. And I would add one more to that is know your team, value systems, all those other things. It's so critical.
I agree totally.
So what's next for you, Sam, or Masters? Where do you see yourselves headed?
Well, I think we're actually going to have a season. I've told our team the next 36 to 48 months will make all the difference for our future. So we have to make sure we're doing the right things at the right time. We can't be running off in all different directions. We've all got to row in coordination with one another. So strategic execution, strategic planning are all keys to that. I think for us, immediate future is solidifying our enrollment gains and establishing a solid strategy for identifying and reconnecting with our base, and then figuring out where the new markets are and how to deliver the education in ways that are useful to the constituents, accessible, affordable to the constituents, and at the same time, highly useful through the partnerships that we have. And I just think, not reinventing who we are, but reinventing the delivery systems of how we deliver the education that we deliver and the values that we put in play. What should a graduate look like? In other words, who should they be? What should they be able to do? And what should they know going out the gate? What skills should they have? And making sure those are really clear and figuring out how to do all of that in our existing culture as we tool up for tomorrow. I think those are really important things for us going forward. So, I'm at a stage in life where this is an exciting time for Masters University. It's an exciting time for me. I feel like I've all the experiences that I've had in higher ed have just sort of coalesced here. So I'm looking forward to seeing what God does through our university and what God does in me, because it's all about the university, but you're also changing as a person. I see myself as the chief learner at the university here. So what am I learning? How is God changing me as an educator, as an administrator, and even as a follower of Jesus? What is happening in me? So I'm looking forward to that. I'm excited about our future.
And you should be. I mean, you guys have got an incredible institution there, and I would say, no flattery, they picked the right person to lead Masters.
Well, thank you, Jerome. That's very kind of you to say, and appreciate all of your help and support.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Sam. Thanks again for being on the show. It's been great chatting with you again.
All right. God bless.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening this week. And a special thank you to this week's special guest, Dr. Sam Horn, president of the Masters University and Seminary, and for his sharing his thoughts on how the first 100 days of a presidency has changed due to COVID. Our next guest is Dana Kowick, president of RPI Executive Search, who'll be joining us to discuss how the presidential search process has and is changing due to COVID. You won't want to miss this one, especially those of you who are aspiring for new president positions.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drum McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.